Evening, everybody, and welcome to the Kinross Local Committee. This is very exciting. We're struggling a bit down here, and we may come and go during the evening because the internet in the campus is actually down, so we've had to jerry-rig something to make it work. This is the Kinross Local Committee, to which you're all welcome. If you can use your chat box officers, and Jeff, if you want to just put your hand up, we'll try and keep an eye out for you if you want to speak. I'm aware you're not aware of not familiar with the system. I'll ask Kirsten Clark on my left to call out the roll call.
Thank you, convener. So this morning, or this afternoon even, or this evening, we have apologies from Douglas Fraser with Jeff Christie substituting. We also have apologies from Malcolm Thompson with Neil Bingham substituting. So down at the campus today, all members are present, apart from we have Jeff Christie online. I should confirm that Jeff's present.
Yeah, I'm here. Yep.
Thank you. And Hannah Phillips, she's present.
Can you turn your mic off, Hannah, and say you're there?
I'm here, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have Councillor Robertson yet?
I can see he's a tentative actually, just on the people, and maybe he's not able to attend.
Okay, we'll mark him down as able. Okay, are there any declarations of interest on any of the papers that are coming forward? No. Okay. The next thing is the minutes of the last meeting. That's the meeting of the 24th of November. Are we all happy with them? Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposal? I wasn't here. You weren't here? Are you happy with them?
Yes, I have a second.
Okay, so Councillor Waters is. Right. We'll start off with a quick explanation on Brunthill Wind Farm. The purpose of this is really it's a large development in the Oakhalls, and it's going through a different process from what all the community councils are used to. So what I've done is I've asked one of the planning officers to come forward. We've got Christian Smith here to explain the process, so we all understand how we can feed into this particular application. I don't want to talk about the merits or not demerits of the site, because that would create a problem with Richard and I on the committee. But Christian, if you'd like to give us a brief explanation.
Certainly, convener, and thanks for having me along today. Delighted to be here and more than happy to answer any questions or anything after this brief advisory note. But in effect, the issue or the emergence of this proposal was actually brought to my attention by local members once they were contacted by the parties behind this proposal to seek to give members some information and ability to engage in that. But the project in itself, in terms of who the application would be made to, is defined under the Electricity Act and Section 36 of that, where the determining authority would not be Perth and Kinross Council, rather the Scottish Government. So the scale of the proposal knocks it into an area where we are not the authority who makes the decision on the planning proposal. So that's maybe the first thing to make everyone aware of. And in fact, any engagement on commenting on the planning application would be to the Energy Consents Unit of Scottish Government and not to Perth and Kinross Council as planning authority. Perth and Kinross Council as the planning authority would be a consultee in relation to the proposals, and this Energy Consents Unit would issue a consultation to us if and when they received that application. That's not the case at the moment. In fact, the application is currently just at the stage of initial clarification of scoping of the application and pre-consultation matters with the Scottish Government and Energy Consents Unit. So at this point in time, Perth and Kinross Council are not formally involved. I think there was an explanation issued to all local members in relation to the process, background and likely scenarios that would happen. So hopefully some of what I've saying today is just expanding or saying that in some more lay terms. Now, there are various pieces of information, and again, I think these were set out in the circulation to various members in relation to the process and how to engage. So looking at energy consents for energy infrastructure on the Scottish Government website, and that gives information in relation to how energy consents are processed, and equally specific guidance on the application procedure, again via the Energy Consents Unit website that sets out the application procedure and publicity requirements. So there would be advertisements in local papers, etc., and also notifications or ability to engage with the Energy Consents Unit in relation to the application. And one of those consultations would be with Perth and Kinross Council, and we would assess the proposals in themselves, come to a view in relation to officers' opinions based on the relevant considerations we would have. We would do a paper, and that would go to the Planning and Placemaking Committee, ideally to get a considered view from members of that committee, and that would then feed into the Energy Consents Unit. If the council decided it wished to object to the proposals, then that would lead to a public local inquiry to determine whether or not consent should be granted. But that's maybe a whistle-stop tour of how the process would work. And as I say, simply reiterating in part what has already been circulated to all ward members within Kinrossshire. And as I say, I'm happy to answer any questions if I possibly can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, please.
We'll start with Sarah.
The fact that there's a second wind farm being proposed right next door at Craighead Farm, will they be looked at separately or together?
Yes, they'll both be looked at separately because each application will be considered on its merits, but equally the cumulative effects of both will need to be considered within the decision-making process. Now, that would be whether it was Perth and Kinross Council considering the proposals if they were submitted side by side or separately. The first one would be considered on the basis of what was known at that time, but if a second followed afterwards, then that would consider the cumulative impacts and inform the position that we would take as a consultee. And I would presume with a great degree of certainty that the Energy Consents Unit would also, as the decision-making authority, need to consider the cumulative impacts from the second or both submitted parallel.
Okay, Brad.
I know that Perth and Kinross Council are statutory consultee, but will community councils who are affected by this proposal or these planning requests, will they be consulted as part of that process, or is that something that's internal to Perth and Kinross only?
Anyone can comment on the proposals and the way in which to do that, and who would be consulted is set out on the Energy Consents Unit's website. And I think I circulated, or my staff circulated, those links to all local members, and if anyone else wants to see those links, if they can't find it themselves, I'm happy to circulate that.
Do you find that useful if it was circulated?
Yeah, I think it would be. Yeah.
Okay,
I can put it into the chat right now.
That's good. Thank
Perfect.
you. Happy with that. Okay, Richard, you wanted to?
Yeah, Christian, just in very general terms, you mentioned that if during the consultation or the council as a consultee within the process, if the decision as part of that is we want to object it, you go to a public inquiry. What if you were looking at mitigation within that, and you were, as a consultee, you were going asking and saying that, and again, would be happy with it if there was mitigation in place. Does that lead to a public inquiry, or is that just that will the Scottish Government just take that request?
I can step in there for you, Councillor. I think I get the gist of what you're saying. In effect, you are either not objecting or you're objecting unless conditions are complied with or mitigations are implemented. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you only think that if it came to pass that it was only considered that the development was acceptable if additional mitigations were in place.
Yes.
So it would then be, if those mitigations weren't put in place, that you would be objecting.
And it would go to an inquiry.
And it would go to a public inquiry.
Thank you.
Okay with that? Neil.
Thanks, Davina, and thanks, Christian, for your comments. Can I just ask, do you have an idea of how many of these sorts of applications have happened sort of historically, either within Perth and Kinross or indeed Scotland? Is it quite a common occurrence, particularly if you've got any examples of wind farms, just to give an idea of what's happened in the past, if that makes sense?
I don't have numbers for you, but the Energy Consent Unit deals with multiple applications every year, whether it be for onshore, offshore, or other energy generating or transmitting infrastructure. For example, they were the body that processed the Beauly-Denny power lines, but equally many of the offshore wind farms that surround Scotland, and equally onshore infrastructure as well, wind farms and other things. So it's not unusual nationally, but there haven't been any wind farm proposals that fall into the Section 36 categorisation within Perth and Kinross for a number of years now. But many other authorities have had many more of them over the recent years. But I don't have numbers for you, sorry.
No, that's fine. It was just to get an idea. Thank you.
Happy with that? Dave Morris.
Quite clear, I think, that from these two applications that I've seen so far, seems to me to be impossible to assess. Because one is for all of the locals, on which it's shown that the existing wind farms, new wind farms which have already received planning approval, and these two applications. I can't see any other way making that assessment unless it's central to the information that's available to everybody. There is a complete map of the O'Calls, and where will that be seen? That the developer's responsibility, or Energy Consent's responsibility, or the PKC's?
Can you answer that, Christian? Is it something you can answer?
I'd love to be able to answer it, but I think the first thing I would say is I really didn't catch half of that. It was coming in and out, but I think the gist of the question was similar to what was mentioned earlier, that will cumulative impacts associated to existing wind turbines and or previously approved wind turbines, which perhaps are not in situ as yet, be considered when assessing these proposals? Is that a summary of the question?
Well, no. My question is there a map available? Somebody has got to produce a map of the whole of the O'Calls from Stirling right through to Perth to show what all of the existing and proposed wind farms are. You cannot assess cumulative impact without seeing it on a map.
Is that a responsibility of PKC, Christian? Do we have a map which has all the wind farms marked on it and the two proposals also marked, or could we do one?
Even if PKC had one, areas would fall out with our administrative area, but the environmental impact assessment that I would imagine is being scoped currently with the energy consents unit, I would imagine will consider all consented, implemented in situ or able to be put in situ turbines within the theoretical visual zone of influence. So the environmental impact assessment and report associated to that may well consider all those issues, and that may include a map. But cumulative impacts will be considered based on the information that can be gathered. So
just to take what Christian's saying, normally when you get a wind farm application, and the application comes in, it will have various maps showing the other wind farms in the area. It'll also show views from various viewpoints and so on. So I think that's further down the line. We're not at that stage. At this stage, this is a scoping exercise, I believe. Yeah.
Well, my understanding, again, I think, you know, has been explained earlier and to members. At this point in time, Perth and Kinross Council and officers thereof are not involved in the process because there is no application, and we have not been consulted as a statutory consultee because there is no application. But having looked at the energy consents unit's information online, it would appear that the scoping of the development and the need for and content of an environmental impact assessment and associated report is being discussed with the energy consents unit, who are the authority to agree that scoping.
Well, I would like it to be recorded in this committee then that people agree that this procurement must be an essential component of the environmental assessment of the whole of the locals. Because otherwise, we're only going to be dealing with the detail. It's too late, you know, trying to make comments about cumulative impact.
I think we should perhaps wait for the process to start. This is really very much, it hasn't even gone to a planning application yet or reached the stage where the scoping has been agreed, I think. And in principle, the scoping exercise is to determine whether there should be an environmental impact assessment or not. If there should be, then you will get all these things you're asking for. It will show all the various wind turbines and so on. Do you want to ask a question?
No, I just wanted to actually comment on that. I don't know if the other community councils actually got an invitation from both Brunthill and Craighead for input in the scoping exercise. We actually at Fossaway, we got a specific email from them requesting our input as to what we wanted to see in the scoping exercise. And we as a community council actually submitted our proposals for what must be included in the Brunthill scoping. And also when we had the presentation by Galileo for the Craighead Farm application, we've also said the same, that these are the items we wanted to include. And specifically one was that there must be a cumulative map produced of all the wind farms and extending out, because the map they produced was very much looking at a smaller area, but they then took it further. I have to admit, the one for Craighead Farm was a much more detailed presentation as to what they were looking at and which communities would be affected. But that's definitely.
It is raising another problem now, and that's, it seems though the developer consultation has simply been with one community council. Speaking for Paul Moke, we've had no consultation from any of the developers about this. But it is quite clear, particularly from the information in the newsletter this month, that this is a massive proposal, a massive landscape impact. So I do think we need to be quite clear. We need a list of all the community councils that the developers should be consulting with, not just within Kinross Shire, but potentially over the other side of the Opals.
What do you think to that suggestion, Christian?
Well, I think, as I said, the energy consents unit are the body that are managing this process, not Perth and Kinross Council. We are simply a consultee and will respond. Who the energy consent unit are required to consult with is a matter to be raised with them.
Yes, Neil.
I was just going to add a comment. I don't think there's any reason to stop the community councils contacting the developers directly to invite them. Obviously, we know that Galileo, who have not submitted an application, are the only two parties to actually contact either elected members or community councils directly, and I would assume that they would be quite happy to come and speak. Similarly, I'm sure if an approach is made to, I think it's I forget the name, is it E-Power, the other applicant, I think it could write to them directly and invite them to make a presentation if that would be of benefit. But it was just a suggestion.
Well, I think that's a bit so hodgepodge of an answer, really, because we don't want. I mean, with this situation, surely we need a collective process going forward. I mean, I think PKC has got a bit more of a responsibility to ensure that all the relevant community councils are consulted. We don't want to be going backwards and forwards, each individual community council speaking with the developers. I mean, the best thing is for the developers to be here, actually.
I hear what you're saying, Sarah.
I'd like to actually put a proposal forward that the wind farms are actually added as a permanent agenda item for the local area committee meetings, and that the LAC becomes the conduit at which the community councils all put in together.
Happy with that?
We would have to take legal advice on that. Better as sitting on the planning committee, I would have thought.
That's the other thing.
That's the
You mentioned that again. I'm not sure whether or not that's going to be a conflict of interest.
What we can.
We'll take that suggestion to legal and see what they say. But I think in the initial phase, community council should make contact with the developers, and then we'll see what we can do about bringing it back to this committee. I don't want to spend the whole night on this.
But what I'll do is I'll forward to all the other community councils what we've had, and also the report that Nicola did, which was our submission to the scoping exercise.
Yeah. Can we move on? Is everyone happy to do that? Okay, moving on to the road safety update. Thank you, Christian, for your time. Feel free to head home now. Okay, road safety update. Darryl McEwen, there you are. I see you. Would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, convener. Yes, the report has been submitted detailing the temporary traffic regulation orders and the new full traffic regulation orders that are to be made across Ward 8. They include a total of 8 of the temporary 20-mile-per-hour limits that are due to be made permanent, 2 existing temporary 30-mile-per-hour limits that are to be made permanent, along with 4 new 30-mile-per-hour speed limits. There's 1 existing temporary 40 to be made permanent and 2 new traffic regulation orders for 40, 1 school keep clear site and 2 sets of double yellow lines. The priority up until now has been in addressing the temporary traffic regulation orders that were introduced during COVID to assist physical distancing. We've consulted on all of those, and we're partway through the process to make those restrictions permanent. But with our regular meeting with the ward councillors, we've identified then some of the priorities within the local community for new traffic regulation orders, and that, like I say, includes 430s to 40s. We are hoping that these limits will all be advertised in March, and we would expect to have them on the ground then hopefully during the summertime. Because we have already consulted with the elected members and the communities about them, we're not anticipating any objections that would delay the process, but it is always possible that that can happen. Before I go on to the second part of the report, which deals with Kinross High Street, does anyone have any questions about the new speed limits?
Anybody?
Right.
Sarah.
Yeah. Darryl, and thank you for that meeting we had the other day. Can I just clarify on 5.5, the Drum East extension? I presume is that on the B9097?
It is, yes. The existing 40 finishes very close to the minor road junction that leads into Drum. We're extending it a little bit beyond that to allow for the vehicles who are slowing down to carry out the turning manoeuvre coming in and out of that junction will be within the reduced speed limit.
Okay. Have you any indication of how much further along it will be as it has passed the sewage works or?
No, it's only a short distance because there's very limited frontage development. Beyond that, we didn't feel it was appropriate to extend it as far as the sewage works. So it's really just extending another sort of 30, 50 metres so that the junction is covered by it.
Thank you.
After that,
Yeah.
any other questions? Okay, Kinross Town Centre regeneration.
We had a site meeting back 13th of January, as it states in the report, on the ground, walking around the high street. One of the main issues was the Burnsbeg road junction. There are no junction markings there, no give way signs. That was a deliberate design within the scheme that all drivers approaching the junction should do so with caution because it's not clear who has priority. There have been requests to introduce give-way markings and give-way signs, but as the report states there, I mean, there's no collision history at it, but we have had a number of expressions of concern about driving behaviour in the area and the uncertainty when you're coming from Burnsbeg where the actual give-way should be or how far out onto the high street the vehicle should encroach before giving way to traffic coming from the right. One of the difficulties there is the surface material that has been used. So the mouth of the junction is constructed of the same stone as the rest of that central part of the high street. The normal thermoplastic road marking that we use doesn't adhere particularly well to stone. If we were to put it down onto the stone, it's likely to peel off. So one option was to move the junction markings back onto the asphalt surface. It means that you're sitting back from the junction, but if it helps drivers to understand that they are approaching a priority junction and that they are only proceeding with caution beyond that, it will certainly reduce the risk of collision. We can put up signs, but the signs would normally be put in place to supplement or to support the road markings. You wouldn't normally put signs up on their own without the junction markings being placed on the ground. There was some discussion at the site meeting about whether we excavate the stone, we actually lift the stone and reinstate the asphalt road surface across the mouth of the junction so that we could put the markings closer to where the original junction had been. And that is an option, but there is a cost implication involved in that. At the time, we thought that we had agreement, but there's been some discussion since with the elected members, and it was certainly just felt that it would be appropriate for Kinross Community Council to have an input into that, whether they wanted the junction changed or not. Some of the other areas of concern were the priority system outside the Salutation Hotel, where you can see on the ground there's damage to the bollards that are there. I think that the facility, particularly on the hotel side, of widening the footway and improving the pedestrian facilities is an asset to the community, and we wouldn't want to reinstate two-way traffic at that location. We did discuss whether we would remove the raised platform, the raised area, and reintroduce a raised curb line, but it was felt that the existing system probably operates reasonably well for the majority of road users, but that we could enhance it, make it more visible, make it more prominent, replace the bollards on the west side, and then on the hotel side look at putting in some sort of planters or some other feature, some other item of street furniture that would make it more noticeable. There was certainly no desire to remove it, and it was recognised that pedestrian facilities in the area have improved. I think a little less clear was the area around the old town hall, which was originally planned as an open space area, and there was some uncertainty as regards delineation between where the carriageway is and where the footways are. Is it a shared space? Is it a traditional layout with carriageway and footway? And there's further investigation to be carried out there as to what is adopted, and if the areas right up to the building line are adopted, what the council would want, or the councillors and the community council would want us to do with that area. So I think that covers most of what is in the report, but if anyone has any questions, if you want to ask me, please do so.
In principle, we looked at the whole area. I mean, clearly there's too much volume of traffic coming through there. There is issues with people parking in the area, causing difficulty for pedestrians and so on. That's all sort of been looked at. I think there's a couple of key points here. There's the Burnsbeg Street, and there's a question of whether we put something to delineate the edges of the actual pavement. because at the moment people don't feel safe walking through. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions on what is in the report or what Daryl's just said. I don't know if Kinross Community Council want to come in at this point.
From the Community Council's point of view, I think there has to be some sort of clear demarcation between the road and the pavement there. We also have an issue with the speeding is an issue through the town centre. And the bollards obviously don't help with that. The big bollards, the far end of the town centre, and nobody knows whether that's, like you say, whether it's footway or whether it's road. And there's obviously cars parking when they stop at takeaways or cafes, you know, they're parking up all over the place. It's just a mess. So there needs to be some sort of definition. The Burnsbeg Junction is the real issue because although there hasn't been an accident as yet, I've seen several near misses. And the last thing we want is something to happen. I think the problem with putting the give way signs, if we were to put a give way sign further back, like you're suggesting, it would be very hard to see your way out of the junction. For cars that are giving way, they would find it almost impossible, I think, to turn onto the main road because you wouldn't have a good line of sight, and it's very difficult as it is already. So I don't quite know what the solution is there, but that's certainly a big issue. The other issue that I was asked to bring up was the parking, because obviously we've now car park that's charging, and 2 hours seems to be the maximum that you can park there, and there's just not enough town centre parking, I think, which is obviously causing the issues for all these cars parking on the road and all over the place.
Yeah.
I think we'll come to the parking on a separate meeting at some point. If we just stick to what Daryl's presented, did you actually have a question for Daryl, Hannah, or is it just you wanted to make that sort of comment?
I just wanted to put the views of the Community Council over, really. I don't know what the solution is if we can't put road markings down, like he's saying that obviously it would peel off, but I don't think moving it back would be a good solution.
Okay, so does anyone else have comments or questions? I mean, yeah, Richard, do you want to comment?
Daryl, just two questions. The first one first is I measured roughly how far back the lines would be.
Yeah.
Until you hit a point where you get visibility up and down the streets, and it's about in a car. Obviously, you're sitting a wee bit further back from the front of the bonnet. It was about 3.5 meters before you actually got a good sight down the high street to move. Is there anywhere else? I was trying to think if there's anywhere else where there's a similar type junction that doesn't have another traffic control measure, example traffic lights or something.
Yeah, we do. I mean, traffic signals is probably the most obvious answer. I don't think that would necessarily be appropriate at this particular location. It would certainly change how the whole area is used. We have vehicle activated warning signs at some junctions, but they're usually in more rural areas where visibility is restricted and where vehicle speeds are higher, because you're right on a rural road where as a vehicle approaches the side road, there's a warning sign would then be displayed onto the main road so that the driver approaching the junction knows that there's a vehicle likely to emerge. We had talked on site about putting in, whether you put in studs or some sort of markings on top of the brick, but again, you always have this issue about what will actually adhere to that stone surface. I think another issue is with the stone, because it is light in colour, to put a white road marking down on top of it in certain light conditions, poor light conditions, it may not be particularly visible. We also talked about changing the priorities, but that discussion didn't last particularly long. I mean, you're just creating a different type of problem. I mean, it wasn't initially a roads scheme, it was an environmental improvement scheme, but we do recognise that Burnsbeg Junction carries, a considerable volume of traffic in relation to the main road, and that volume of traffic is likely to increase as development of the Loch Shore expands. So it is something we're keen to address. What we haven't done is priced out actually what it would cost to lift the stones across the mouth of the junction and reinstate it in asphalt. But we can look at that and report back.
Would you have a further question before we do this?
You've partly covered the second question in that answer, but you did mention in your introduction that normal markings don't adhere to
Yeah.
to the stone. So I assume there are other options of things that can adhere to it, and you kind of covered that with studs.
Yeah, we've been investigating that part of it. What you can do is you can scarify, or you can roughen the surface of the stone to try and improve the adhesion, if you like. We know that other local authorities have had similar problems. I've yet to identify a long-term solution to it. What I don't want to do is put markings down that constantly need to be refreshed. But if that is the only feasible option at this time, we may need to consider that in the short term.
You happy with that? Did you want to make a comment at the same time?
Yeah, I'll come in later on that comment if that's okay.
Is there any further questions for Darren? Right, you can come in with a comment now.
You want to move and I'll move and amend.
Well, I'm kind of taking a more relaxed view to this. I think we've got a problem that there isn't a clear answer to. You have a view on the Burnsbeck junction, so if you want to express it.
I have a lot of concern about it, that when you know, people are driving up and they find a junction and you're stopping at it, and then you've got 3.5 meters to kind of roll forward before you can get a line sight. It just creates even more confusion and on the road. There, you know, I think, you know, it does look nice. The real problem with the High Street and Burnsbeck Street is the amount of traffic that we're using it. And I know in 514, Darryl has covered the needs for, and the officers are looking at this origin and destination survey potentially, which may help actually deal with the amount of traffic, which might resolve some of the issues that are currently felt within the area, within people down on the High Street. I am very uncomfortable about putting the line back at the current tarmac.
Okay, well, I'm quite happy to accept that as an amendment to the motion.
And I think the Kinross Community Council raised the same issues. So, yeah, you know, if there was some studs or something that kind of delineated the junction in a less formal way, would that be enough to let people know a rough idea of where the priority lies?
I think it's also.
I think more investigation would be needed by officers, and that's what I would prefer to.
I think Darryl did say that any road markings would be supported by a sign as well.
Yeah.
So I guess the options are do nothing, do the lines 3.5 meters back, or support it with a sign, or take the stone up and replace it by asphalt or some other material. So I guess they're the three options. And if you don't feel that the giveaway sign 3.5 meters back is a solution, and I guess you don't believe a do nothing is a solution, then the only solution then is to investigate another option in terms of putting the road markings around nearer and maybe replacing the surface.
Yeah, could you not cut? I know the way the stones lie, it's not an easy lift you would have to cut. Can you not still saw along and cut a channel at the front and put some? Do you know when you come up and down the High Street, you've got these spacers type, which are concrete and they run the length, the width of the High Street. Yeah. Is there not options on the junction to you know, without lifting the whole lot? Would it not be more economical to cut something like that, put concrete down and then put some markings on that at a point where there is visibility for Splay to see what's up and down the High Street?
What I suggest is we note that we're not going to incorporate the junction markings, but you're going to go away and come back with some alternative solutions. And I'm quite happy to move that as the motion if you want to put that as an amendment in.
That's your choice.
So I'm quite happy to move this paper as it is, with the exception of the Burnsbeck Street. Is there anything anyone else wants to add to that? Or?
I would just agree with Richard's comments. Actually, it does feel that putting the lines there just wouldn't really solve the problem because of the 3.5 meter gap. But okay, so yeah, I agree with what he said.
Sorry? That's good. Are you happy with that, Hannah?
Yeah, I think the only other option I thought of was speed cushions, possibly, but I'm not convinced that would work.
Do you want to respond, Darryl?
Yes, if I can just come in there. Looking at the traffic survey data, there's nothing to suggest that the vehicle speeds are particularly high to a level that could give the police cause for concern. But I'm talking about excessive speeding. I mean, the majority of drivers are driving at or close to the speed limit. I think what happens as you come down the high street, as you approach the Burnsbeg junction and the town hall, visually and physically the road widens and the whole area opens out and the road surface changes, so the road noise changes. I think that the perception of speed is probably higher than the actual speed. However, if the drivers aren't paying attention, it doesn't really matter what speed they are travelling at. You know, if the driver's coming downhill along the high street and not expecting someone to come out from the Burnsbeg junction, there's a risk of collision there. I will admit that there will be, particularly later at night when traffic volumes are lower, the speeds go up and there will be some high speeds, but the majority of speeds are not as high as you may feel they are. However, we are willing to undertake new traffic surveys because it's some time since we've done them previously. We want to take a look and see what's happening. We know the volume of vehicles, but we don't know where they are going. Are all those vehicles coming in and out of Burnsbeg, or are they just driving right through? So there is further investigation required in that area. I think because of the concern about the particular junction, we will try and prioritise that and we will look at alternative design options for it. If the speeds are low enough, the visibility is adequate as you come out of Burnsbeg junction, but we would prefer it to be more than just adequate. So we will investigate further.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. So do I have a seconder for the motion?
I'm happy to second it and very happy with Darryl's comments there on the origin and destination survey, and appreciate the fact that it will be prioritised. That is the real issue on the high street. And if solutions can come out of that, that would be a huge step forward. Thank you.
Do we have any further comments on that? No? Okay, I've asked the watchers to take the next two papers.
Thank you. Item 6 on the papers is the former Blaringone Primary School. Can I ask Lee Hagston to introduce the paper?
Yeah, happy to do so. Can I just check that everybody can hear me okay? Everything just dropped out for me for a few seconds just there. Thumbs up. Great, excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, this report updates committee on progress with the potential community asset transfer of the former school and schoolhouse at Blaringone. Sections 4 and 5 set out the background and summarise progress to date. More specifically, section 5.4 summarises what the Community Development Trust will need to submit in order to allow the community asset transfer team within the council to assess their request and make a recommendation for committee decision. The paper recommends that the Community Development Trust be given up to the 30th of June to submit a full community asset transfer request. And if that asset transfer request is received, the asset transfer team will assess the proposals and bring a report to a future devolved committee for Kinross, which is currently the local committee, and property subcommittee for a final decision. If the request is not received, then council will consider alternative methods of disposal. I have a further update which has been provided since the report was submitted. So just for your information, I've been told in the last couple of days that OSCR, the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, have confirmed their in-principle support for Fossaway Community Development Trust being registered as a charity, which will then allow them to submit a valid community asset transfer request. And in addition to that, a third party has indicated an interest in these assets, but having looked at their proposals, officers have encouraged them to work alongside the Community Development Trust to have a joint proposal being brought forward. And my understanding is that they've met on at least 2 occasions since then and are looking to work together where they can. Happy to take any questions.
Good news, Lee. Thank you. Any questions? Neil?
Thanks, Lee. Just to ask, I will know who the second interested party was.
That's it. It was
confidential, which is fine. Sorry,
it's not confidential as such. I'm just wary because they submitted an expression of interest, and I had to go back to them and explain that as a private company they wouldn't be able to submit an asset transfer request. So suggested that they contact the development trust. Right.
That's fine. Don't worry.
I can probably dig that one out for you. I would need to go back and double check the exact name just to be clear.
Yeah, don't worry. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Do you want a comment or do you want a question?
I just thought if I could
come up to Mike.
Please do, Mike.
If I could just update you.
Mike's over there.
Is the mic?
You're okay.
You're there. Speak there. You're
Over here.
Here, right. If I could just update you, we have the in principle charitable status criteria, as you said, Lee. There's been a slight hold up with the company incorporation, which I think is minor. Myself and another director, Marion Innes, are going to meet the third party who've expressed interest to see if there's some common ground. We're aware we've got to put this asset transfer form in by the extended deadline, and we will do that. The main point is to really take things forward. The main issue with that building is the toilet facilities, which are designed for children and need to be upgraded to an adult facility for the usage that's planned. And that will not be cheap. We haven't gone to the extent of getting a survey or anything like that. Maybe the council might be able to assist with that process in terms of possible cost. That would be a useful piece of information. So that's where we're at the moment. We've got 40 members at the moment of the trust paid up.
Lee, do you want to respond to the toilet situation or anything? Or
yeah, so go Fiona.
I mean, we can pick that up with you, Mike.
Yeah.
And there are various, as you know, various different pots of money that the trust can apply to within the council and elsewhere to support development costs with your asset transfer request, including surveys of the building, if that's what's needed. So we'll give you some advice on that.
Thank you very much.
Separately. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
Thank you, Fiona.
I was just going to ask if that money was available. It's not covered. So.
Perfect. Any other questions? I'm happy to move the report. I think trying to protect these as community buildings is essential, and especially for somewhere like Blair and Gone that's lost a pub, a school, a church. So more than happy to accept the proposals and the extension that's required. Can I ask if there's a seconder?
Vice Convener. I'm more than happy to second. It's an excellent idea to keep it in the community. There's no real other faults there, so it's ideal for what the community in Blair and Gone could do. So happy to second it.
Does anybody want to make any comments? To move forward with item 7. Yep. Item 7, King George V Management Committee. Can I again come back to Lee and ask if he's happy to introduce the report?
Yes, happy to do so. I'm aware that there are members of the Management Committee in attendance as well, but the report in front of you summarises a bid from the Management Committee for £30,000 as a contribution towards a larger project valued at about £280,000 to upgrade and improve the facilities at the pavilion. Section 4 summarises an application that was received for the 2022-23 Community Investment Fund and the recommendation from elected members, and Section 5 contains a brief assessment of the project and a proposal for funding. In short, elected members wished to support the project from the Community Investment Fund, but as the budget for the whole ward was 35,000, they felt it was difficult to do so. So members proposed to fund the project from an alternative source. The Local Action Partnership are also supportive of this proposal. The local committee has a devolved budget of £40,000 to support projects in the ward, and the report recommends that £30,000 of that budget is awarded to the managing committee, conditional upon them securing the other remaining funding to cover the funding gap. Again, happy to take any questions, but I'm aware that there is more information to follow. Thanks.
The presentation, can we do that? Andy Williams is chair of Kinross George V Plainfields Management Committee, and he would like to do a short presentation. Andy, you have 10 minutes under our standing orders. So would you like to? Do we have the presentation we can put online?
Maybe online on screen. The front, and you can look at everybody. We can all look at you. Intimidate you.
Thank you.
Over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andy Williams. I'm the chair of the King George V Plainfields Management Committee. Thank you for the opportunity this evening to give you an overview of our plans for the improvement to the sport and social facilities at the KGV's Pavilion. Next slide, please. So this is a photo montage of what the pavilion hopefully will look like when we complete. But how did we get there? So back in 2018, it's becoming increasingly apparent that there was growing pressure on the facilities and the users of the pavilion, in particular the number of different clubs and societies that wanted to use the changing rooms. So to address the problem, we drew up outline plans using as much guidance as we could from the various sporting bodies, and submitted those plans for approval. And we in 2019 we got planning approval for our proposal. So next slide, please. So when we looked at what we were going to do, what were our imperatives for the improvements of facilities, these are the guidelines that we followed, and mainly the focus was the fact that, again, with guidance from the sporting bodies, that we really should look to have separate facilities for under 18s, for minors, so that they were separate from the adult facilities, and that was part of our premise. Next slide, please. So if you look at the main users of the facilities, they're all listed there. They are different users have a different input. The actual day-to-day management of the facilities is under the stewardship of the Kinross Rugby Club, and they look after booking facilities and as such, and they are in fact the main users, closely followed by the hockey club, where the football club are you going to use the facilities more and more, and then there are various others involved. Socially, there's a wide range of groups, society groups that use the upstairs facilities, the lounge facilities. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So just to make sure where we are, so this is Stirling Road here. There's the clubhouse with the extension onto it, and you can see what we're actually doing as well is we're going to extend and improve the car parking facilities, which is a real problem at the moment, and that's going to alleviate problems on parking on the main street. Next slide, please. So this is what the elevations will look like, and the main point to note is that we're going to extend out towards the existing seconds rugby pitch. That'll give us an extra 2 changing rooms and a few other facilities, but also it'll give us viewing areas and an extension upstairs. Next slide, please. So if you look at these are the plans that were submitted. The items marked in red are the existing, and the items marked in blue are the extension, the improvements. And the main thing to note is the increased number of changing rooms with a separate corridor access. We've also got a flexible changing room, which is effectively will also be a fidget room. We've got single-use facilities for non-binary and transgender users. Again, all following current advice from the main sporting organisations. Okay, so a part of what we were doing here is it's not just increasing the changing rooms, but also the sustainability. Can we actually keep this facility running, and what's it going to cost? So part and parcel of all that we did is we developed a business plan on how much it would cost and what would it take to sustain these buildings. The KGB itself doesn't have any operating money. It has very few fees. So these facilities really have to be self-supporting. And so part and parcel of that is we recognise, yes, we've got the changing rooms, but that gives us the opportunity to extend the lounge area, and that gives us an increased capacity. So we can then, I hesitate to use the word market, but we can then offer the facility as perhaps a wedding reception venue. Because of the increase in size, we can actually deal with a reception of 100 plus people. And that's part and parcel of what we were trying to do. The other thing that we recognised is when the building was put together and the existing building was constructed, different attitudes, times have moved on. We now recognise that there's an admission there was no wheelchair access to the first floor. So we've included that in the new plans. So what you can see is we've extended the lounge. It's given us a viewing terrace on the left there, which overlooks the hockey pitch. It's giving us a viewing terrace looking over the seconds pitch, and then an external function area, which will be part and parcel of the increased community access. And then access from that lounge, extended lounges by full doors. Okay, next slide, please. So that's just a quick overview of what we're actually providing with the new plans. And much of that really already discussed. And the next slide, please. So we see this as a community facility, and we believe that it should be the development of an extension of the building should be using as many local trade and building services as we can. So that's what we've done. We've employed a local architect. We've employed a local structural engineer, a local project manager who you will know, Malky Thompson, and we are looking to build up a list of local trades that we can use to support the build. And the next slide, please. Okay, so where are we? In March of last year, after the lockdown, we resuscitated the project and then actively sought funding for the structure. We've done remarkably well, and we've had strong support from the Garnacky Trust, from the Arthur and Margaret Thompson charity, Sport Scotland, Scottish Rugby Union, and the rugby club itself has actually put a lot of money into the process as well. So what we're asking for here is that £30,000 that will really close the gap, so we can actually get to the 280,000 estimate for the build. And that really is it. Any questions? Deadly silence.
Any questions for either Andy or for Lee?
Okay. got my colleague with the project behind you is Callum Love. He's the Vice President of the Rugby Club, and he's here to help answer any questions you may have as well.
Okay. My question is quite simple. It's just how close are you to finalising the full package?
We are very close. As with all these projects, the different funding organisations are happy to fund, providing the other organisations fund, and we can prove and justify that it's a viable project. We are with the 30,000. We will be a viable project. If we don't get the 30,000, then we have to go back and think again. But in terms of where we are and our plans for the project, if the funding is in place, then we will start work in the second half of March, and we would aim to have the changing rooms and the ground floor complete and ready for use for the start of the next sports season. So we're looking at end of August, and then hopefully at the same time we'll have the community facilities upstairs ready, but they may take a bit longer to finish off. And again, our outline plan at this stage is that the whole thing will be completed by the end of the year.
So in essence, if we give agreement to process this and put it through, then he's going to have to get his checkbook out pretty smartish. Yes.
I have to say that all the various bodies we've spoken to and the local councils, the support we've had for this has been really heartening. It's been tremendous, really.
Sarah, it's just a thought. I mean, please shoot me down in flames. But with the extension of the roof and the positioning, is this an opportunity to put solar panels on for renewable energy, so that this is not only a great asset to the community, but it's a flagship to show other people that if you think about this in the bigger picture.
Okay, so now you're embarrassing me, because why didn't we think of that? That's a very good point.
About it 2 years ago.
That's a very good point, and I'll take that away. It's not in our budget plans at the moment, but that certainly doesn't mean that we can't have it fitted for, but not with at the moment, and something we can do in the future.
Well, yes, factor in. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure there must be lots of grants available for sticking renewable energy sources.
Fiona, did you want to come in?
Only briefly it's a decision for committee, but I think just to make a couple of points. And one is this kind of project is very much aligned with the new physical activity and sport strategy of the council, which was considered by council in draft just before Christmas, which is about how we support and enable more community-led sports initiatives to happen. I think the kind of the chicken and egg thing about different funders and who's going to blink first, if you like, is a really, really common dilemma for projects of this kind, and not unusual. Lee can say more about this if the committee needs us to convener, but with a grant of this level, we would use, as the report says, the same due diligence and monitoring as we would do it for a grant of this level through some of our other schemes, just to kind of make sure that we're all up among the angels, as it were, in terms of
yes, indeed, but
project delivery spend.
Those stipulations of all the funding that we've been promised, they all have those same stipulations.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what we're putting in place is effectively an open accounting system ready for audit, and that's what we must do. And the funding, we will not get the funding from the different organisations. We'll get the funding in stages. So we'll meet milestones, and then they will release more funding, and that's what we expect.
Thank you, Fran.
I was just going to echo Sarah's comment, but I was also going to add, you have the enviable, I'm totally for this, by the way, just to clarify, but you have the enviable position of having playing fields there where you could put in ground source heat pump, and then you could run that off solar panels and essentially be 100% sustainable. for your heat and energy use that we all know is shooting up through the roof. So perhaps that might be something to bear in mind and look at.
Okay, you embarrassed me again. It's a very good point. I'll have to take it away. Thank you.
Matt. Yeah, I'm not going to embarrass you. Mine's a very basic question. I think you seem to me to be getting a lot for your 280,000, and I'm just conscious that construction inflation is going through the roof. So I just wondered what your contingencies are and what would Plan B be if it comes in above the 280,000.
Okay, the 280 was a pessimistic assessment, and in terms of contingency in that figure, there's a 13% contingency, so it's quite significant. What we've done, we looked very carefully at how we were going to do this, and learned a lot of lessons from what the Colts did with their pavilion at Donaldson Park. So we haven't gone out and found a building company and said, here are the plans, please build us a building. What we've done is we've commissioned an architect, we've commissioned a structural engineer, and we've employed a building project manager. So we're not actually paying a building company's overhead. So we can control the costs and the process at each level. And the other aspect is, whilst that's a very nice, excuse me, that's a great photomontage. It's the building itself. What we're doing is very simple. We're extending the ground floor with a breeze block structure. Yes, we'll face it off, and we'll put a structural terrace on top, and then we'll build out the existing structure. So it's not actually a difficult build.
It was just really, did you mention that there was going to be a lift for access to the first floor?
Yep.
That they can be pretty expensive, and that was the thing that sort of came through to me.
Okay, we are talking with one of the main funders about providing the additional funding for the lift. The lift in the original 2018 plans, we hadn't considered the lift, and then after the lockdown and a chance to go back to plans, it's obvious that we should have it. But yeah, we think we have a route for that. And if there are problems and we don't expect there to be, then it'll be something that will come in. As I say, we'll build it for, but not necessarily with, and then install it a couple of years down the line.
Any more questions?
I had a comment when you're ready.
If you want to, once it's a bit more informal, if you want to make it now, you can do.
Yeah, I know. Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, thanks again, Andy, thank you, convener. Thank you, Andy, for your vice convener. Sorry, thank you, Andy, for your presentation. I think one thing that sort of stuck in my mind when four ward councillors met with yourselves and the funding bodies and the sports bodies, obviously I think the case for it makes it quite apparent, particularly the expansion of the rugby club and all the other users of it, and obviously the fan of rugby and a great interest. But the other thing as well was about the facility, and of course, as I think yourself or someone pointed out at the time, there was no other facility anymore, social space of that size. I think since the Windlestrae went, there's no large scale meetings place for holding dinners, galas, whatever have you. So that to me was also one of the things which moved it from just being about the sports and the users, but being a facility for the wider area. So I think it's just important to reiterate, and that was one of the things for me that sort of got me over the line. Although I was obviously.
I just added our business plan basically says that if we can bring in 10 wedding reception type events through the year, that will sustain the facility. That will pay for the maintenance and heating and whatever. So it also means that the local charities and organisations that want to use the facility, that generally they get to use the facility for free because we're able to fund it elsewhere.
I just say as well, in line with what you're saying, the rugby club regularly get 2 or 3 inquiries a month for parties, weddings, even wakes. Some of them we can accommodate because they're of a size of that cope with the existing structure. Others we can't because it's not big enough. Obviously, sport always takes first, but yeah, there is definitely, from what we've seen, there is a desire for a function suite of this type in the Kinross shire area at the moment.
And one of the things we've done with the plans is, at the moment, if anybody goes there and you look at the main entrance, it looks like what it is. It's the main entrance to a rugby club. So we've carefully thought what can we do to make it more appealing as a social facility, and that's what we've done. Well, that's hopefully what we've done.
Maybe just a mention about, I know you've talked about other eco-friendly initiatives. We are engaged with an ex-member of SEPA who some of you may know lives out in Kinross, and we're designing the car park with its own self-draining mechanism into an environmentally friendly hedge arrangement that self-drains and self-feeds.
Yeah, we're putting in a SUD system, which will, if anybody's familiar, there's an ongoing flooding problem with the car park anyway, and that will extend the car park, but that is part of the plan to anticipate some future problems.
Andy, thank you very much. Very much appreciate it, and the benefits of these nature or rain garden type systems as they help, you know, protect and enhance and restore our nature and biodiversity. And you know, when you can do things in that way using nature rather than just pure engineering, I think nature has a better engineering way of achieving these things. So absolutely brilliant to hear that. I mean, just a thanks as well. Thanks, Andy, but thanks as well to officers for the work that went in behind this. There was a lot of work to make this happen, and that's very much appreciated. I know this is supported by all 4 ward councillors. I know Willie's not here, but I know he's very supportive of this project. I think it's great. I think you know, encouraging sport and having the facilities that allow you to encourage sport, you know, from able to, you know, and people who struggle with that is absolutely admirable. Also absolutely delighted that the way, you know, the comment you made about for charities and for other organisations to open it up free of charge was for myself a huge plus point in supporting this. So I'm happy to move and say that we do fund this out of this committee's £40,000, so we give you £30,000 of that. Can I ask if anybody would second that?
I'm happy to second that. It's a fantastic project, and I think it's been a bit of a struggle getting it here, but I do appreciate the officers' help in getting it here, and go get building basically.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting.
Are there any amendments, or are we happy to pass that?
Second it, third it. You can third it if you want.
Yeah, we did chat about how we could do a consensus type vote, because you know all 4 ward councillors have been exceptionally supportive of this, and it's sometimes when you move a motion you feel you're getting some whatever, but if there was a way within standing orders to do something that says by consensus, you know, we're all equally supportive of the project, so thank you.
Thank you.
And I will pass back to the convener.
Thank you. You don't have to stay unless you want to as well. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the final substantive paper, which is the interim evaluation report of the Kinross Shire Local Committee. I'll ask Fiona to introduce this. In essence, there was an interim review carried out on how the committee operated and has been operating, with recommendations for going forward. I wanted to bring it to you because you're the committee to consider what's in the paper, get some thoughts back and so on. So Fiona, if you want to introduce it, and perhaps you.
Yes, thanks, convener. I think you've covered it really. As everyone's aware, this local committee is a pilot project, but it does sit within a much wider context for the council and a more broader direction of travel in terms of devolving decisions to local committees and local communities as far as we possibly can. So this is a very important committee from the council's broader perspective and being watched. You are being watched quite closely just in terms of how we make this work really effectively. I'm not going to say much more than that beyond, as the convener has said, we're kind of midpoint or just over midpoint through running the pilot, and hand over to Ian Clark, our independent assessor, who's been observing meetings, has had a number of discussions with many people around this table and others. So Ian, you've got a presentation for us.
Front again. So can we get this presentation on screen?
Thanks. If you can just go on to the second slide, whoever's. That was it. Quickest presentation. Back one more. There we go. Yeah, as Fiona mentioned, it's the local area committee is a pilot, so we quite often get asked as social researchers, as evaluators, to evaluate pilot projects, and really that's to bring some independence and to feedback to the client on the impact of the whatever the project was. In this case, obviously, it's the local area committee. The brief that we're working to has some quite specific kind of questions. One is about how the local area committee discharges its powers during that first year, to learn the lessons from that, to see how that impacts on the workings of the council, but also to pick up on any barriers or enablers to its effectiveness. Second one is really to start to look at the real impact that the local area committee has on local decision making. Third one is about the impact on local democracy and community engagement, community empowerment. And the final one is really to look at the implications for the council as an organisation, particularly the resource implications, any implications it has in terms of the decision-making process, the structures within the council, but also with the local area partnership which exists in Kinross, and obviously of course the rest of Perth and Kinross. So that was the brief we were given. Next slide, please. Just very quickly talk about what we actually did. As Fiona mentioned, we've been observing all of the meetings throughout 2002. There we go. And also we, as most of you will have taken part in, we spoke to the ward councillors, including the previous ward councillors before the election. Also spoke to the community council representatives, and I've had a number of conversations with the council officers. We've also looked at the paperwork, the scheme of administration, but also the agendas, the supporting papers that have gone along with that, and the minutes. We also had, at the start of the process, looked at area committees in other areas in Scotland, local authorities in Scotland, just to see how they were set up, what kind of issues they addressed, what the attendance was like at those. So we've got something to compare what we're seeing here. In terms of outputs, originally we were asked to produce a final report around about this time because of the delays in the code process. That's now been put back until the final report in May. We offered to produce an interim report. We were really keen as evaluators to try and feed into the process. We offered to do what we call a formative evaluation and produce some findings with that. We started, we submitted the first draft in September, and the relevance of saying that is really just because that's most of the kind of findings were based on the meetings pre-September. So some of the things have moved on a little bit since then. That was signed off in early December. And that's the report that you've all seen, you've all had a chance to look at. The next slide, please. So just quickly in terms of the actual meetings themselves, I just wanted to look at the first kind of interviews that I did with folk back at the start of this. It was really the point of that was for us to understand what people would regard as the success for this. And it was really interesting to see that, because it was very much about having seen actions happen, that it wasn't just seen as a talk and shop. And if it is seen as a talk and shop, then people, across the board were keen that it really didn't kind of continue in that vein. We were struck at the start about how supportive everybody was, the ward councillors, the council officers, and the community council representatives as well. And it was really strong. There was a really strong consensus on that. And there was a real hope at the start that it would meet those aims about enhancing, local decision making, local democracy, and hopefully empowering the communities. As I mentioned, the officers were also really quite supportive of the whole process. They're mindful of what implications that would have for them in terms of their capacity, their workload, the resource implications it might have for the council as a whole, and any kind of implications it would have on the decision-making process. So really quite a positive kind of outlook. As I say, the main point of that was to see what people would regard as a success, and it's real tangible actions that are coming from that. Next slide, please. Right, oh, there we go. So when we produced the final report in December, the interim report, sorry, in December, that up to that point there'd been five meetings, all online. Slightly less than envisaged start, but that's, I think it's only one that would have happened at that stage. And there were mitigating circumstances occurred in the local elections, officers' capacity, and the summer recess. So, it's broadly on track in terms of that. It's been really well attended by the ward councillors. I think every meeting has been really well attended by ward councillors. That was both pre and post the local elections. Quite strong representation as well from the community council representatives. At least 4 at every meeting. I think there was 6 at the first one. There's some IT issues that affected everybody in the June meeting, and I know that was a kind of one-off IT issue. I think individuals have had their own IT issues. On average, looking at the attendance kind of in the minutes, there's been on average 9 council officers at the meetings from a variety of different parts within the council, the legal services, who obviously administered the meeting, but also a strong representation from communities and from road safety officers. And we've been struck about how they've been involved in the discussions, how professional they've been, how respectful they've been. So that's been really positive from them. When we look at the other area committees in other areas, the level of officer input here is on a par with the input in other areas. What I would say is in the other areas they've had quite much fuller agendas, and I'll come on to that. So at the minute, the officer input is quite kind of not excessive, but it's kind of, it was something that we wanted to look into in further detail. Next slide, please. So what we did in terms of the interim report was focus on the 2 main issues in terms of what the impact, is intended to be of the local area committee. And the first one is community empowerment. The first thing that we would say on that is actually the fact that the local area committee has formalised the involvement of community councils is actually quite an example of good practice. A lot of the other area committees that we looked at don't have that. I think it's only in one other local authority area that is a formalised kind of part. Yes, the community councils attend, but they're not necessarily members. So that's a real kind of positive for the way it's been established in Kinross Shire, which actually gives a lot of scope going forward, to empower the community. What we did say though is that the formality of the meetings was quite striking, and the online format of the meetings, we flagged those up as potential barriers to that engagement, that real kind of empowerment of the community. The meetings were very formal. That struck us, especially the first 2 or 3 meetings were really quite formal. And when we spoke to some of the community council representatives, some of those felt it was a little bit off-putting. It was really quite kind of formal in that setting. They weren't quite sure how, when they were allowed to come in, what they were allowed to ask, how the whole process worked. I would say, as I said at the start, a lot of these some of these findings were kind of set, based on the earlier meetings. I think the last couple of meetings, certainly the August and the November one and today's one, I would say have been less formal and more inclusive. So I think that's one of the benefits of that formative evaluation that I talked about, really trying to input to the process before it comes to the end of the pilot. I think the online format added to that formality. I think, it was difficult in the first instance to kind of to make a point, to jump in, to just get that conversation going. I think today, has been an example of how the hybrid format does lend itself a little bit to being a little bit more inclusive. I think one of the things that kind of contributed to the difficulties the community had at the first instance of taking part and being engaged was there wasn't an awful lot of explanation, a lot of support in terms of how the whole process was going to operate and how they would input to online council formal kind of meetings. So we flagged that up. There was a strong preference in all the consultations with both the ward councillors and the community reps for a hybrid format to try and overcome that, to try and just get back to that kind of format. And a significant issue in terms of trying to engage the community and bring issues forward to the local area committee that were of interest to the community is the timing, or the original timing of the distribution of the minutes just didn't really fit in with the community council time scale. So next slide, please. So the second issue that we wanted to focus on in terms of this interim report was what impact is it having, or what was it having up to that point on the local decision making and democracy. And just to say at the start, the scheme of administration was developed over a number of months with, following a lot of kind of discussions between the council officers and the ward councillors. The remit that came out of that was broadly similar to the scheme of administration. So in other areas, it's actually quite a broad remit when you look at what's kind of within the scope of that. Despite it having quite a broad remit, I think it's really quite striking that the meetings, certainly up until the interim report, there were quite a narrow focus. When you look at the agendas, roads was pretty much the main issue. I know the primary school issue has been raised on a number of occasions. And there's been other things around. I think local even was on one of them, and certainly the last few meetings the agenda has widened. But when we sat down to write that interim report, the agenda is really quite narrow, really quite focused on roads. And yes, the roads are important, but I recognise the roads are important both to the ward councillors and to the community council representatives. But really, it was such a narrow focus at that point that it didn't make sense. It was a very resource-intensive way of addressing road issues. So one of the recommendations we were made, and which has very much been taken on board, is to try and widen that agenda. I think there was a point where the agenda setting became quite a kind of hot topic between the officers and the ward councillors. Certainly in terms of there was some issues put forward by the ward councillors which weren't making it onto the agenda. And I know there was a lot of discussions behind the scenes and trying to address that. Some of it was kind of around whether it was competent business, some of it was about the officers not having to put papers forward. We're aware of that. I think things have moved on in a positive way from that point. There's been quite a lot of meetings, quite a lot of kind of pre-agenda meetings, quite a lot of thought gone into what's going to go on the agenda in the future. We just wanted to flag that up as something that at that point in time was becoming a bit of a kind of barrier to the kind of effectiveness of the local area committee, and was one of the reasons why the roads were dominating the agenda. As I say, the agenda certainly since the November meeting and today's meeting has been wider as part of a kind of move to maybe look at the kind of overall scope or purpose of the local area committee and whether it's a little bit wider than it was kind of maybe envisaged at the start. And that, you know, some of the discussions around that are maybe around the membership and where that kind of goes in the future. As evaluators, we need to make sure that that doesn't then start duplicating, or if it does, then just to flag that up, the local area partnership, because there's kind of potentially two organisations working in the same space. So that's one of the focuses that we'll have when we come to write the final report. And really the final point on that, in terms of trying to, increase local democracies, up until that point is really quite difficult, I think, for the community representatives to influence the agenda. I know there was a route there to go through the convener and the vice convener. It wasn't really coming through in terms of items that were coming up, and it was quite a convoluted route. So that was one of the things we in terms of looking for potential barriers, we highlighted. Next slide, please. Nearly there. And just really to try and pull that all together, the interim report, we talk about I think the local area committee certainly has the potential to meet those aims of enhancing local decision making and empowering the local community. I think, however, at that point, those ambitions were hindered by the very narrow agenda and the formality and the online nature of the meetings. Certainly, there's been progress since then, and moving forward, our final report, will focus very clearly on those questions which were posed at the start. Some of the things that we need to make sure we do is pick up on the resources. How, there's a lot of officer time has gone into supporting the local area committee, not just the actual, hour or two of the meeting, but the pre-meetings, all the papers that are produced. So we'll try and kind of get some quantification of that. We also need to look at that issue around the potential duplication or with the local area partnership. That's part of the wider kind of movement and discussions that Fiona mentioned about local democracy within the local authority. So we'll, in the next kind of month to 2 months, we'll get in contact with everybody and really to, get your views and your experiences and feed that back into what hopefully, will be a useful final evaluation report. The last slide is just whether, second last slide, you're right, is just to say we made some recommendations. Some of these have been picked up on already, and certainly, the hybrid meetings one, we're living proof that that's happening. The less formal meeting style, I think, is something that's been taken on board, in the last couple of meetings. And there's a few other things about really just trying to improve and enhance the access and the kind of availability of the community engagement side. So the last slide is any questions. Happy to deal with anything that anybody's got.
Yeah, that was interesting. Just a bit of an update on, because obviously this is what's happened before. Just to say that Mark is here. He's Mark Butterworth. I don't know if you want to introduce your title and so on.
Yeah, I'm Head of Environmental and Consumer Services at the Council.
So he's now become the lead officer for Kinross Local Committee.
Winning the lottery, isn't
it? Yeah, you've got the millions. You've got the green ticket, the golden ticket.
Absolutely.
But in principle, what we've agreed is we're going to have conveners meetings. Up until now, there hasn't been a sort of a formal way of doing that. I would welcome any agenda items that you might want put onto the agenda, put to me, and then we'll discuss them. There are complications. It's not a simple matter putting a paper to the committee, but it's a matter of us talking and seeing what the officer input would be. When we've got things like the presentation we had earlier, the KGV one, it's quite simple. When you've got to do a whole report, there's a whole lot of work goes into it, cross-checking and so on. So in essence, if you want to put anything on, if you let me know. I think I'm delighted we're here, as is Audrey. She's really happy to be here with the technology stuck together with a sticking plaster. So in principle, one of the things I would like to talk about at some point is whether we move the meetings back to 2 monthly, What's happened is they've been made to quarterly meetings. The next one is in 3 months' time, and obviously it's dependent on what's coming in on the agenda. The reason it was moved to quarterly was there wasn't really any papers coming through, but we're adopting a different approach now. So we're getting more papers that are community driven, written by community, written by external consultants. So the officer input's less. And obviously there is a lot of issues that we could be discussing as a group. So for example, the loch and the pollution in it, there's things like that. We might be able to get SEPA or someone to come, but that's for another time. I'll leave you to ask questions. Does anyone have any questions for Ian? Yes, Neil.
Thanks very much for your presentation again. I just wanted to pick up on one of your recommendations at the end about the membership of the committee, because obviously if it was increasing, that may have an impact on frequency, etc. One of the things which sort of strikes me is that one of the things about the committee, all the members are currently elected, and if you then start opening it out, how does that kind of, how do you sort of square that? I mean, there's 2 points. One is, I suppose, potential for it becoming a talking shop and losing focus, and the other is about, you know, that the fact is that everyone is elected, you know, they're accountable. The decision maker, the voting members are elected by the, obviously part of the council, and the wider community councillors are also elected. How do you kind of square that, and also the issue of it potentially becoming a talking shop if you start just making it, you know, sort of less accountable, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
It's a question of accountability, I think, is what I'm getting.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I would say on that one, we're not recommending that you do widen the membership. I think we're just recognising that that's a discussion that you are having as members of that, and to consider that, so that answering those questions would be part of that consideration. So personally, you know, we're not necessarily saying you should widen the membership, and certainly when you look at the area committees elsewhere, the membership is pretty much the ward councillors, the community councillors attend, but not necessarily as members. They do quite often have presentations from external, you know, organisations, but you know, that would include SEPA, Police Scotland, you know, organisations like that, not necessarily as members. So we're not saying you need to widen the membership for it to, you know, that would make it better. I think what we're saying is you need to, if you need to kind of look at the options on doing that, because I know it's part of what you're doing. So there'd be pros and cons, I guess, of doing that.
Yeah, because I think one of my, just if I can add a comment to that, I think one of the things I like about it is the fact that it does give, I mean, I wouldn't say elevate the status, but it does give community councillors that extra forum and in connection with, which we've seen today with today's agenda. And I think that kind of really sort of, I would hope, enriches the, you know, the role of community councils as well. So that's kind of, I was keen to that and that connection. And community councils obviously have that public forum as well, which they can bring things up. So I think it was just important to kind of maintain that aspect as well.
I think there's a potential danger as well, you know, on the other side of things, if of widening the membership, that it does then become, you know, the local area partnership, and you know where that sits with that, and you might lose some of the kind of benefits of what you've got here. So I think it's really just, you know, it's almost like an option appraisal that you know, you just need to weigh up the pros and cons of the various ways of doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Fiona?
I was just going to comment on that because it is an important point, Neil. I mean, the difference, this is a representative democracy forum, if you like, in terms of everybody here is elected. Broader, and the local action partnership is an example of more participative democracy where, you know, membership is more or less self-select, if you like, and they both have different, you know, pros and cons. For me, from having observed this committee from the start, I think that there would be a real value in encouraging broader attendance.
I was putting people off tonight just because they didn't know how this was going to work, and the 2 or 3 people said, can we come? I said, watch it online. Maybe next meeting once we've proven the technology.
And when I say attendance, Dave, actually I mean both attendance online and in person, but the membership, you know, for the reasons Ian has, you know, outlined, I think is clear, and that's really important, bearing in mind that this committee actually has quite significant responsibilities for infrastructure you've made a significant decision around expenditure this evening. Just a word briefly on the relationship between this committee and the Local Action Partnership. This is a pilot, so ordinarily we wouldn't necessarily have two forums operating in this way side by side. And we knew it was a pilot and that might be a wee bit bumpy from time to time. The way in which we have squared that during the pilot period is that this committee is very focused on infrastructure. You know, again, see previous discussions. The Local Action Partnership is very focused, or should be very focused, on equalities and dealing with stubborn inequalities in the area. And that seems to be working reasonably okay, but I think it is an issue that my team and I need to pick up with Ian in the final evaluation. Just briefly as well on frequency of meetings, this issue about membership and representation, I think these are matters for the final evaluation in terms of recommendations for the future of this committee in the long term, rather than things we can necessarily address in the remaining pilot period. Some of them we can, some of them we've already put in place, as Ian said, others are probably.
Okay. Dave, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the problem. So I discovered for the first time I needed to be a registered user. That's been a problem in the past. I just wanted to comment about, I thought you've been a bit negative in terms. This must not be a talking shop. I would actually throw in a bit of a positive line on that, because this is the only occasion in years when I've actually sat down with the other community councils. So it's a really useful forum to just do exchange a few ideas between the community councils, even though that's not a decision making sort of process. But then I think the main point I've made, and all councillors will say about this remote community council, is that I think there's a tension in this committee where I think the aspiration should be to discuss issues which are clearly of significance across the whole area. And I think Lochleven, pollution issues, etc., opportunities is a really good example of issue which affects all community councils. I think the initial discussion about the wind farms, another issue without getting into the details. Energy, a discussion about energy. Well, you could say energy stroke climate change. That's it's a very important topic, and also I would think just land use in general, because changes in agriculture and forestry grant systems coming along now in the next few months, so years, are incredibly significant in terms of what happens in terms of the forest fields.
If you want to put that in an email to me and discuss it, because there's no point having a standing item if there's nothing to discuss on it. I think the point is that what I tried to do with tonight's agenda is to give us some substantive papers to discuss. The Bruntsville thing, I felt it was useful for all community councils, and it was what you were talking about. It affects everybody. It's an opportunity to sort of share ideas, and you'll start communicating and so on. That was the purpose of that.
Yeah, but also, you talk about roads. I think the difficulty, like the roads item, which is there every time, is that it's very, very easy to suddenly dive into a particular issue and in a particular location. So the studs in Kinross High Street. Well, yeah, that's quite interesting, but it's more of a narrow focus. I would add paths. I think there are generic things which we could talk about the road system and the path system, paths for walking, cycling, horse riding, etc. So I mean, it's just like it's an evolving process, and I appreciate that a lot of staff resource goes into this, and but I just think we should shift in that direction a bit, or the generic stuff rather than the details.
I agree. I don't think there's any. Does anyone dispute that? I don't think so. Does anyone else have any questions or points?
Can I just a couple of comments to start with. I think as a hybrid meeting tonight, I think it's been excellent. I think it makes a big difference in you know, the agenda as well. Good range on the agenda, so I get good contributions of everybody in that. And just a question on the you mentioned the final report that you'll be doing, and this is probably part of the question by yourself and maybe part by Fiona as well. What then will be the process? You know, this is a pilot scheme. You know, there will be a need at some point for it to come before council. But when the final report is produced, will it then come back here? And what's the timescales in the process for that?
So the proposal in the report in front of committee tonight is that the final report should absolutely come back here first and foremost. I think we've penciled that for May. There is a broader piece of work going on within the council, which I'm leading on, about looking at the future of local democratic forums and what the options are. We've got local action partnerships across Perth and Kinross as a whole. We've got this pilot. So we are having a look at that in the round, and we will be looking very closely at Ian's final recommendations, along with a bit of a review that we're doing of the local action partnerships, which have now been around for 8 years, unbelievably. And we will, after that, Richard, be taking some considerations and recommendations to the council's transformation board in the first instance about what the future shape of all of this should look like, and no doubt after that to council, but that won't be until later on this year. I would think the second half of this year if we get to that point.
Thank you. You done? Oh.
Just one comment about, and Mark made, you know, just based on Dave there about the FAF network and that, and the council taking its mobility strategy forward, and potentially is there a possibility, Mark,
Nick,
looking at that from a Kinross perspective and bringing it here as well, right? So
I think the short answer is yes. I think that the long answer is there are so many different things and items that could be brought here, and you know, you've only got a certain amount of time, whether you meet 8 weekly or quarterly.
Aye.
So I would suggest that if people can put forward to yourself, Dave, in terms of potential topics, we perhaps put a work programme together for the committee, which includes a couple of 2 or 3 standing items, maybe, and 2 or 3 other items. But the worst thing is that we could get to a certain point and we're halfway through an item, or it's not debated properly. So there's a balance between bringing lots of different things and managing the agenda. So I said we probably need to go away and do a bit of work on that. And but anything, you can bring anything here. You know, it's entirely up to yourselves. We can go away and ask officers to do presentations, but it's just making sure that we take a balanced approach, really.
I'd just like to make a comment on it. I really appreciate it being a hybrid meeting. I mean, I use Teams at work, but not everyone does. I think there's a slight misunderstanding amongst all of us community councils as to actually what our purpose and input is. Because when this was originally discussed a couple of years ago, when it was going through, it was made clear that we wouldn't have a vote on anything. But I think over the last year, the way the meetings have been held, it has not been encouraging for any of the community council's representatives to actually debate anything that's on the agenda. We put a hand up, make a comment. There's been no debate on any of the agenda items, really. I don't know if any of my other community councils would agree with that, but I think the online version of doing that stopped that debate that used to happen with the old Kinross forum, where you sit around and actually people would bounce ideas around the table and there would be a debate very respectable debate on different issues. And I think we've lost that in the last year.
I think that's a fair comment. I think one of the things is the committee was set up understanding orders for the council, and it's a question of how those are interpreted. But I'm trying to take a far more relaxed approach. I welcome comments. There is a structure that we're supposed to follow, and Kirsten's been told to elbow me in the ribs so I get the structure wrong. But in principle, I think you're right. I think there needs to be more of an open debate. That's why I was asking about Kinross Town Centre. I mean, the only thing that would work is I would present it as my paper, and then I would argue against anyone putting forward the thing, and then you would put forward an amendment, which would be that we didn't put the lines in. It's far better from my perspective that there is that interaction, but we have to move slowly towards what works, and I think tonight was the first time we've done it slightly more relaxed. But yeah, it helps to be hybrid as well.
I think, and on that, I mean, yeah, we all have our particular views about Teams meetings. I can see them far enough, but that's just a personal view. But although more serious point is in some other parts of Perth and Kinross, we've actually found Teams really helpful for encouraging attendance. One of the recommendations that Ian's made has been about, you know, whether we could have done as officers more upfront to give community councils guidance and information, and not teaching you to suck eggs, obviously, I hope, but about how to contribute to the meetings and make them, you know, meaningful and useful for you. And I think we mea culpa on that one. Not badness on our part, just sort of pressure and day-to-day momentum. But you know, we have taken that on board, and Ian and I have had some discussion about that.
Just on that point, I mean, Jeff's taking part, and I don't think he's taken part before, and I don't know how familiar he is with Teams, but there is a problem with the community councils because you will get different representatives. It's not like a councillor type situation. You can't sort of swap people in and out, but there will be occasions when people can attend or not attend. So being hybrid is much easier than trying to do it on Teams.
And I suppose it gives you an added option, doesn't it? Because with the hybrid meetings, anyone can rock up and attend, can't they, if you want to, but if you can't make it, it's easier on Teams. And I think also, you know, depending on the length of the meetings, the time of the meetings, and Perth and Kinross is a big place, it helps officers in terms of being able to attend. They don't have to, you know, travel, there's, you know, distance to get here, and then later on. So if people aren't familiar, they can turn up. If people are familiar, they can present through Teams.
As long as it works. Hey, Audrey. So is there any other questions, comments? Because I'm conscious that we're at 5 to 7.
I think our IT have done an excellent job tonight, given the first came in with no internet.
I knew it would work. It wasn't a problem. About making it work. Thank you for your time. Very much appreciated. Yeah. So I think that concludes the meeting, and thank you all and for attending in person. You're most welcome. Those of you don't have to come. If you want, you're more than welcome to come down. It's quite good to see you and get to know who you are. I don't know if you want to introduce what your role is, Fiona, just briefly.
I'm sorry, yes, I should have said, apologies. My rudeness. I'm head of service in the council, culture, sport and leisure, and the whole community planning and community empowerment agenda. So my team, if you've all met Lee and David Stoker, who's also on the call, has been listening in. We support local action partnerships, administer the community investment fund, and various other small grant schemes as well, common good.
So yeah, it's one of the ELT up, so as is now, so they're up at the top. I'm not inviting any other business because I'm conscious of the time, but if you want to have a chat with her afterwards, with Mark, feel free. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.